Hello everyone, my name's Garv and welcome to HieroGraphix Talking Points. Thanks for joining me as we have an exciting show for you today. Last year, Riot Games made Arcane the canon universe for League of Legends. Many of us had expected this change considering how well received Arcane was and how the base lore of the game had become difficult to follow for some. This week, I'm joined by a friend of mine and we jump into what this means for League and those of us who follow the lore closely. We recorded this episode back in November, and since then, a lot of changes have happened at Riot. We've gotten our first lore video with the start of season 2024. Riot has announced what their plan is for the rest of the year, and they've laid off over 500 employees as well as dissolved Riot Forge. We'll tackle each of these things in future episodes. Before we get started, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I'm trying to grow the channel and I want to hit 250 subscribers in the next few months. If we can achieve this, then I'll be giving away a pristine copy of Quake 2 for the Nintendo Switch. And there you go, you can see it. So if you like our content, please like and subscribe as it helps the channel immensely. Also, if you want to help us continue to do what we do, then consider joining our Patreon. Links are down below. Okay, now we have that out of the way, let's get to it. Hello, welcome to Talking Points. My name is Garv, and today I'm joined by LA, a good friend of mine who we talk about all kinds of lore things and league things and Echo Jinx things. And so I really appreciate him joining us today. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. As Garv said, I'm LA, and best way to I think I can describe myself is I kind of am like a lore sponge for things that interest me: comics, movies, League, Legends lore, stuff like that. So hopefully I can, lend some good info to you guys and get some good speculation and theory crafting going on.
Yeah, I hope so, man. We got kind of a meaty topic today. There's just a lot of stuff to go over. And as you can tell from the title of the video, that we're going to talk about the change that League and Riot have made to change the canon universe from what they had before, which was the League universe. I don't even know what to call it. To
MOBA universe, maybe?
Yeah, I guess that's a good way of describing it. But they changed that to Arcane being the canon lore, and then from there they have Legends of Runeterra, that's also canon, but the main thing is definitely Arcane, and then everything kind of builds up off of that. And that was when they announced that. I mean, I guess people kind of saw it coming, right? We kind of saw it coming.
It sort of made sense at the time, because when you were to compare their original lore with what Arcane was doing, there was just so much more depth, I would say, for a lot of the champions and stuff. And there was some interesting aspects with like how they were handling the regions and like other established lore that they switched up and changed. So I think it was in high demand, but I think it was a question of when they would do it rather than if, and when they would do it, how exactly would it be affected. To have it being changed to this scale, though, not just with Arcane, but also Legends Runeterra, has opened up some very interesting possibilities, and I would dare say conundrums.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on this thing. I mean, I thought it was cool that they decided to go with Arcane as being the main bit of lore, because I agree with you. I think it's fleshed out a lot. But one thing about Arcane is it doesn't flesh out the world so much. It doesn't do a whole lot of world building. It's more of a character driven thing. And so we get a lot of information about Piltover and Zon and all that stuff, and a little bit of Noxus, right? But we don't get anything else about what's going on in other parts of the world. And I don't think that they originally imagined that either. So, which is why it wasn't part of the main story. I don't think they even thought about it when they were putting that together. But, it's like as you said, it's a bit of a conundrum, going forward, like what they're going to do about that.
Right. And to touch up on the topic, at least about how they didn't really think too much going forward, I think unfortunately it was a bit of a part of like Riot, at least the higher ups decision to have a sort of a wait and see approach if the series would, gain any traction among fans, both newcomers coming to leagues just from seeing the series, or from old time league fans who just play the games and stuff and just like the lore, who've been around for years or so. I'm not sure they realized just the wave of adoration the series and how they handled the characters and what little world building lore they had going forward. I don't think they just realized how popular it would have gotten, because if they did, I think they would have gotten more things set up in a row for
I
how they
agree
would handle
with that.
things.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that they probably didn't think this thing was going to take. I mean, you can't blame them. I mean, think about the video game curse, right? Video game to movie to TV show curse, right? Like so many things that they tried, failed miserably. But in recent years, I guess recent months, years, we've seen some of the video game things gain traction. So like, even though the Sonic movie did okay, and I think it was Detective Pikachu also did okay, right. They didn't light the world on fire, right? And it wasn't until the Mario Brothers movie that came out, was it earlier this year, that really,
in the summer,
that really broadened people's view of video game movies. And then, of course, we've got Arcane, which is also a video game TV show that I feel like did a good job of handling the source material without feeling video gamey, and that was
right.
It opened that all up. So those two examples are recent. We've got so many other examples that is so bad.
Right. I would just, if possible, I would just like to add too. I think Arcane set the precedent. Like that's the standard you should strive to reach when you're coming to like video game adaptations. I would say that the only other one that either comes close or ties to it, from what I've been seeing and watching, is The Last of Us live action TV series, which is a video game adaptation. Not hard, because if you played the game, you know how narrative heavy that is. So not exactly hard. I would say in the recent years, at least in a few of the past years, if we were to go for an example before Arcane of something completely demolishing the video game curse, I still would say the moment that happened would have been Castlevania animated series on Netflix.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
Not so much the first season, because there was a lot of setup. But... Oh, you didn't?
No, I didn't watch it at all. I mean, I followed it because there were quite a few friends that watched it and said it was pretty good, but I didn't get around to watching it. But I can see that for sure. I can definitely see that, because it did have a lot of positive buzz. But I don't know if it was in the same vein as Arcane. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like Arcane won awards and stuff. Like it just a whole, I don't know. It's just a whole nother level of acceptance, storytelling, and
I get
the source material. I would say.
Right. Oh no, I get you, and I wouldn't put Castlevania on the same pedestal as Arcane. I would say, at best, Castlevania walked so Arcane could run. It at least softened people up to the whole notion of video game adaptations. So instead of them immediately hearing Arcane and saying, "Oh, this is immediately going to suck" or anything, with successes, at least small time successes or mid successes like Castlevania and other stuff before Arcane, it at least softened people's preconceived notions that, hey, maybe this won't suck. And then Arcane came and smashed all notions and saying, oh my lord, this is how you do it. This is the standard. Everyone take notes.
No,
So
I agree.
that's basically my conception.
No, I agree. I have no argument there. I think that video game adaptations have always had issues, and so it's just interesting to see that they were able to fix it, or find it, or navigate that genre in a way that it made sense. Where they're able to put in the source material, like Vi having the big gauntlets, right? You think that's a video gamey thing, but the way it was presented and the way that it was handled in the show was really well done. And so you don't think, oh man, that's just some stupid video game like Sonic collecting rings. Like, what's the point of that? You know what I'm saying? Whereas this, I think they did a much better job of integrating that into the world itself. So it feels like it's a thing in the world and not this gamey thing that they put in, that now they have to reconcile some kind of way, which, is the killer of video game adaptations. With some exceptions, I think Mario wore that video game
badge.
It basically wore that badge like on its sleeve, so and leaned into it, and used it as a way to tell the narrative and stuff. It didn't work for me personally, but the general watcher, or people who consume that media, they really liked it. So I think it worked, and it worked for the medium that they were in, and it made $1 billion or something. So obviously it's the highest grossing video game movie of all time, and that is good because maybe that means we'll see more of that sort of thing. So it's not too surprising that they decided to take Arcane and make that the lore of League. But I think the bigger piece for me was making their original lore obsolete. I just, like they took all the original lore and threw it out the window. It was like instantly, it's all gone. We're starting fresh here with something else. And
for the most part, I think actually, if I were to think back on the dev video from the Rioters back in October, they said some things of the original lore can still stick. I have no idea what those are, but I think, at least to me, regions that are mostly isolated or untouched by what's going on in the Arcane lore, for the most part, may not have as heavy changes as we might think. Although I think we've already seen hints of it. Well, not so much changing, but evolving, I guess you can say. But if you want to go like for a change, like something like just completely deleting like the old lore and having a huge effect, I would go no further than some of the champion VGUs or ASUs, like one champion Skarner, whose entire race of the Brackern was heavily integrated and interwoven with old school Piltover Zon lore, especially with Hexite and Hextech energy, because the Brackern, they were basically the source of all Hextech, and that's just not the case anymore with what they would change with the lore with this one champion. And for a while now, a lot of people were going, okay, so how is this going to affect the lore going forward? And I think it wasn't until that announcement in October that we found the answer. Oh, Arcane, where Jace and Victor were the creators of Hextech technology, and how they brought this to the world, and how it's not something that's been going on for hundreds of years already. Okay, I see. It makes sense. It's interesting. It was like a little sneak preview of how the world is changing before they even announced that Arcane became the new canon.
No, I think that's one of the things for me, and why, to be honest, it's why I decided to do this, because all those little things, and you think when you're world building, if I'm crafting my world, then you sometimes don't think about the little things, but as you tell stories in your world, then those little things become prominent, because for the characters they mean something. So taking what you had, and even if you think, well, some of that can fit in the Arcane setup, but I think that there's a lot of it that can't. And so those things will have to get adjusted, because there are little things in lots of people's lore that just don't make any sense if Arcane is the main driver or the main part of their lore. And so seeing that, and then thinking of how much of their 10 years 12 13 of content 20... that they're gonna have to go back and tweak, rewrite, or change, so many things from the old days to now.
Well, I think the one thing, it's interesting, it is. I think the one thing that at least we may want to keep in the back of our heads is this is not the first time Riot has done this. Riot's been celebrating their 15th anniversary in 2014 next year. They've been at this since 2009. When they first started out, the lore was just it was just copy paste for what was working with WoW at the time with the champions. So you had stuff like generic paladin guy who later became more fleshed out. That was Garen and stuff like that. The thing is, though, when they realized, I think a few years or some years later on, that the lore has become so massive that there's just too many contradictories and there's a lot more people interested than we thought. In 2014, I believe, they made the decision, okay, we're going to have to reboot this. And one of the big things that rebooted was this whole notion of summoners, I guess you can say. Old League lore had it that Summoner's Rift was basically an area where these godlike beings called summoners, i.e. the players, were actually taking these champions and having them pit against each other in this sort of like cosmic or at least worldly competition. The winners would get benefits for their specific regions. They realized with how their lore was becoming more character or region focused outside of this whole summoners things and adding more depth, they had to do a huge reboot, which was what happened in 2014.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the early stories that I read from 2015, they talk about that. To be honest, I didn't know what it was. Like, it's interesting reading those old stories from 2015 that people wrote, where they're referencing that group, but I haven't seen that group at all. So I always assumed, at least when I jumped in, which was early 2022. When I jumped in and I started kind of disseminating League lore, I realized that, or at least my original impression is that the Summoner's Rift thing, the game part of it, is nothing. It doesn't exist. It's just a thing that is the game. And in the world of Runeterra, that thing doesn't exist. Runeterra is just a place with all of the cities and towns and people in it and all the cultures and stuff. But the Summoner's Rift part doesn't exist, and it isn't anything in that world.
Yeah,
But when I read some of those, yeah, but when I read some of the old stories that people wrote, fan stories and stuff, they get into from that time. Later on, as you get closer to now, you don't see that anymore. Nobody really writes stories about the Summoner's Rift with the Summoner guys putting people on the board and stuff. Nobody talks about that now.
Right.
But in the early days, they did, and it was a big thing. And so it's interesting to see that change over time, to phase out that part. So it's cool to see, honestly.
And now we find ourselves where it's going to happen again. Yep. But I just don't know on what scale this time. It's still going to be a major scale, but instead of, I guess the best way to describe it is if 2014 was like just a huge like chop, like a huge cutoff, like immediate like obliteration or something, immediate hard reboot. This one is going to be slowly drip fed over time. And I think that's out of necessity because I'll be honest, even before Arcane, a lot of champions like stories or regions lore have been at a standstill and has been obsolete for longer than it probably should have been. So it's a good thing that after all these years, a lot of these like regions and some of these champions will get like a rewrite or something, or at least, I don't know, have their lore pushed forward. But I don't think it's going to be as immediate as some people may hope. Some champions, I think, will get it done faster. Like if you're Piltover and Zon, thanks to Arcane, you're going to get that done a lot faster. We've seen examples of this already. Like, well, we'll take Echo for an example. Echo, and game-wise, has more and more often been depicted as his Arcane self. A little bit older, dreadlocks instead of the straight hair white mohawk, such as that. We know his lore will need heavy rewrites, along with most of the Piltover and Zon champions. That just seems like, as far as he's concerned, visually speaking, Riot is ahead of the game.
But well, yeah, you can see that they've been, and I don't want to get too much into him because I want to have a whole show of talking about Echo specifically. But right. But I think we've seen them change this or start heading in that direction over the last year or so. Like we start to see them making that change, using his dread look more often than the mohawk one, and that sort of thing. Like making those changes with the character as we go on, and it's something that you figure something is coming, but you don't know when they're gonna just flat out just roll it out. That like this is gonna be the thing and change it on the back end, because right now, even if they've made changes internally on how they're doing things, I haven't seen too many changes on the front end, like where we're looking at. Like most of it, everything we see is still the same stuff that's always been. So they haven't gone in and changed it directly yet.
Right.
And so I'm interested to see when they're going to actually start peeling the layers off this thing, where we're going to start seeing the real changes in how the lore is presented. Because even up until this point, even with the character that they just announced last night, I feel like there's still remnants of the old way that they did things. I don't feel like it's a new thing. So I'm getting the impression that for some things they've had an idea of where they were going for a while, but for other things they haven't. So, like, for example, they've thought, okay, we're going to change Echo to his Arcane version, but change it to the Arcane version in the original League lore.
where it's just a visual change more than anything else, right? You know what I mean? And so, but then when they made the decision, well, we're not just going to do a visual thing, we're changing the lore of the game completely to the arcane one, then that changes a lot about Echo specifically. How old he is, how he interacts with things in the world, his crew that he runs with, characters that were introduced. You know what I'm saying? Like, it changes a lot of that. Whereas if they had just changed the visual makeup of Echo, then that's a lot easier. You can just go, well, he doesn't use the mohawk anymore. Maybe the mohawk becomes a secondary skin that you get, but he starts off with the Firelight one, like that's his default one, and then you can get the old one if you still want it, kind of thing. But his League version is still the same League version that we've always known. But now that this changed, like, he has to change a lot on a fundamental level. That's different. And I kind of feel like they started off that way, but then they went, oh, you know what? We're just going to tump over the table, and we're going to just bring in Arcane as being the lore. And that just, changes so many other things. It's like a domino effect. And I honestly think that the biggest issue that they're going to have is reconciling all of that with Legends of Runeterra, which is the card game, because I feel like Legends of Runeterra is completely different than Arcane, not just in tone, but it borrows more from the original lore and not the Arcane lore. So I feel like it's akin to trying to take the old lore and warp it into Arcane, which is a completely different thing. So how do you reconcile those two things? I don't know. I feel like they've got their work cut out for them for sure.
Yeah, I'm still a bit confused on how exactly you're going to push Legends of Runeterra's lore into like the new canon, specifically because you had the old main canon, which was mostly based around the MOBA, and then you had the card game and Arcane, who were like basically adjacent. They weren't as crazy like you see like skin AUs, like the music AUs with KDA and True Damage and stuff. It wasn't like the Odyssey AU or Star Guardians or anything like that. It's because because these two were so closely tied. But like you said, the tone of the two is so vastly different. If you want to keep the same tone with Legends of Runeterra going, while still saying that Arcane is now one of the founding pillars of the new canon lore, it seems almost next to impossible. I mean, I've equated the tone of Legends of Runeterra, at least with their lore and with their Path of Champions narrative, as something akin to like a teenage Saturday morning cartoon or something. Like there's stakes and stuff, but it's mostly like, oh, they'll be okay in the end. Oh, it's like this Power Rangers episode or this X-Men episode or something like that. They don't lose the levity of it all, which is really kind of like a mental whiplash.
Yeah, it's jarring, right? And the other thing about that is that Arcane doesn't get into, like I said before, it doesn't get into all of the other places in Runeterra. So you are left with these blank spots. And what I've decided to do internally is I've just ignored everything that's happened in the lore, and just mainly just focus on Arcane as being the point. Because I just think that if you try to merge Legends of Runeterra and the original lore into Arcane, I just feel like you've got to start doing some mental gymnastics to make things work. And I feel like they don't want that to happen. Like, they want you to feel like that's a natural progression from this thing to that thing. Like it all makes sense. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that I have with them including Legends of Runeterra. Now, to be honest, in the video that they released, they do not mention Legends of Runeterra at all. They only mention Arcane as being the thing, and things that are coming up in the future are going to be part of that universe, that canon. It is, I think you showed me that it was on Reddit that somebody made a post about Legends of Runeterra also being part of that, but that wasn't part of what they said originally. And in that case, I felt like it made more sense, because then they could go back and say, okay, well, Arcane is the beginning. And so we're going to start there. And from that point, we're going to go back to all the pieces and keep some of the things that we can keep, but change the things that make the most sense to change, because they don't make sense in that world. Which means that as we go out, especially from Piltover and Zon, and farther we go out, and matter of fact, even looking into Noxus and stuff, right? So even getting in some of that, because some of that's also in Arcane, it touches a little bit, right? So we have those things that we can use as the kind of base of things. And then from there, kind of try to fit the pieces. Especially even in Piltover and Zon, there are a lot of characters that we just aren't going to see. Like we are not. I'll be surprised if we see a character like Twitch, or something like that. I mean, maybe Dr. Mundo will show up, maybe, even though I don't think so, but maybe.
I would say I wouldn't be surprised in the next coming season next year that we will see instances of the show alluding to other Piltover and Zon champions that they just don't have enough time or any like proper pacing to like actually give them the proper development and introduction and such. I honestly still have the holdout hope that little rat that we saw in episode 1 of Arcane was alluding to Twitch, or maybe that thanks to those experiments, that's how Twitch became what he is in the game. That's just me holding out hope. But like you said, it is interesting because we are going to have to really delve into the lore of the world, and especially the characters, and it's like a game of operation of what they want to pick out, and if they have enough or something like relevant enough to like replace it with and still have it fit. I like one of the biggest examples I can think of is champions that, again, we're probably not going to see in the series, but we could take Seraphine, for example, or because if I could go back to what I previously sort of said about the Bracken race and how in the old, now obsolete lore, they were like the source of all hex tech, with their hex crystals being from them, literally housing their souls. Seraphine's current / old lore does not line up with any of that. It's just been obliterated. So now they have to work from the ground up and see how does she still fit in Piltover and Zon with her abilities and such, and have it still tied to hex tech in some way. But with Camille, instead of having her old lore completely obliterated, it is a game of operation, ironically, with that specific champion, because she's basically a cyborg assassin powered through hex tech. Okay, so hex tech, old lore, around for hundreds of years. That's done. That's not how it is. It's still relatively new, not even a decade old.
Yeah, not even. In fact, not even what it's only what,
like 7 years?
No, not even that. Like the whole part, the whole after episode 3. So starting from episode 4 to the end is only like a week. So there's a time skip in there where they're working on it.
Right. Between acts
and they
1
finally
and
get
2.
it. And even in the series, even in the episodes we see, they finally get it to a refined state. But it has not been in anything, and it hasn't done anything, it hasn't been announced, hasn't been anything. And it's only been like a week. So they need to do some time skip if they're going to do some stuff, because there's enough time for anything to happen. So they're going to have to skip some time. You know, I thought, you know, when I watched, I thought that more time passed, like 6 months or something. Before I watched it again, which I watched it again recently, and realized it was only like a week.
Right, from acts 2 to 3, yeah, it's only been like a week. I would say it's only been like a few days, even.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not long at all. Like everything goes down in a matter of days. You know, but when you think about that, and which is why I think they really got to go back, and it's a little off. I'm going a little bit off tangent here, but on a tangent. But I want to say that Jinx building fish bones in such a short amount of time, I feel like doesn't make any damn sense. But okay, fine, we can let it go. I think it would have been better if she would have had more time. You know, like more time to craft the stuff, figure out what it is, and do it. But all that happens in like like I said, a few days. You know, so a week at most. You know, so you think she got it, stole it, built fish bones, and all that. You know, in such a short amount of time. And when you think about how long it takes to make things. You know, that's maybe she already had the basic idea of fish bones already laid out. And so she just converted that, whatever she had, to this. That makes sense. But I didn't see them make that, imply that anywhere. Like you get the impression she built that from scratch. Like, you know, it's, you know, I don't know. I just, yeah. But anyway, yeah, they've got some serious issues because Hex Tech just has not been anything in that world. You know,
other than like the gates, which was their crowning achievement, you don't actually see much of it being implemented in the widespread as you see in the old lore.
Exactly. Like, you know, so how would, like you said, Seraphine get a hold of that stuff? Anybody that their whole, the basis of their character is built on the back of Hex Tech that isn't one of our original players. I feel like we'll need some rewriting. Camille, how she get the Hex Tech, considering they haven't showed it to anybody really. Like, you know, I especially the refined stuff, because we're talking about the stuff that they're using for the gates is what, not the refined stuff. It's something special they build for the gates, you know. But the new stuff is the stuff that, you know, is stable, and, you know, it's not gonna, you know, you can put it in things and you can use it in external things. So they've cracked that code, right? So they can now do that, but that's not a mass produced item at all. It hasn't even been announced, because like he was gonna announce it at Progress Day, right? But in the end decides not to. So, you know, it's not even something that most people even know about.
I would say I agree with everything you're saying. Like Avi's gauntlets or Victor's eventual third arm, still very much in the like burgeoning stage. I would say, because it's an origin story with Arcane, and this is basically one of the basically set up to be a foundation of the canon lore going forward. If I'm still of the mind that maybe Camille may show up or be alluded to in season 2. That's just me, like with some copium, or some hopium, I should say. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things that I'm very curious how they handle it, as these characters' stories will still continue even after the show. How that happens is like making my like thoughts race or something. I mean, cinematics, further through the game events, new games coming out either through Riot Forge or official. Like take Project L for example. We had some previous talks, like you and me, about how that will handle narrative, and yes, that fighting game will have narrative. And if they're going to make it so concise, and Arcane's the starting point, it's how can I convey this correctly? How can I convey it the way I want? It's
I think that you're onto something. I think that they have really got to nail down what the narrative, how the narrative is going to work going forward in other games and other ways. How are they going to move the story forward in a way that makes sense, especially if we watch them in Arcane? Like, we know what happened. You can't, you start worrying about their personalities, their look. Like, for example, I'm starting to think the reason why they didn't show Jinx in this new, and when they show Project L, like the reason why she's not there, I wouldn't be surprised if she gets a redesign. Because if Arcane is the base part of this and it takes place in that world, then it would be hard to imagine that tall, lanky Jinx is little Jinx that we know of in Arcane.
That's actually interesting. So you're saying that the Jinx we've seen in Project L from the dev videos and previews, where she's tall and lanky and tall and echo and stuff, she has some allusions to her Arcane self, mostly with like the new crop top instead of that sort of like makeshift like bullet bikini top she has. You're saying after the decision that Arcane has become the new canon, the devs had to go back, at least with her character design in some cases, and change it up to make it more consistent with that new canon. And that may be the reason why she wasn't available to play in the recent demos we've seen in from Evo, or recently in Worlds 2023 in South Korea, with the demo that they've had for the fighting game, that they had to go back and switch it up a bit.
Right, but because, if you think about it, right, if that game before, it was a mix of Arcane and League, because Jinx is kind of League Jinx, but not Arcane Jinx. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
She kind of has that look. She's got some bits of Arcane on her, but she's definitely not Arcane Jinx for sure.
Right.
But if she's supposed to be, and that is supposed to take place in the Arcane world, then her character is completely different from the Jinx we know from Arcane.
You might have just uncovered something else.
They're gonna have to go back and make that work, right? Because otherwise, who's gonna believe that little Jinx that we know in Arcane is that big, tall, lanky Jinx? You know what I'm saying? Nobody's gonna believe that.
That's true, but I think you just actually touched up on something I don't think we've ever really thought of, and it's something that it's been creeping in my head, and it's still like a theory of mine. If we looked at the character designs for most of the characters in Project L so far, you see that for people like Yasuo, Ari, or Darius, it's pretty much, for the most part, a shot for shot of what they look like in League of Legends. A little change here and there, like Yasuo's pauldron on his shoulder is not as big or something. Or Ari may have some different kind of aesthetic to her costume, but it's still very similar. To Echo has had a complete revamped look in Project L. I mean, it doesn't follow his arcane look, which is now canon. It doesn't follow his old League lore look from his from the MOBA and from the card game, and even from his own game Convergence. So it actually made me ask the question: is Project L Echo a secret preview, or at least an unintended preview of what he may be looking like going forward? Like in Arcane Season 2 or such, I believe there's going to be some wardrobe changes for some of these champions and stuff. So like Vi, right, you gotta sell the skins. So I know some of these things will look different. Will Project L Echo at least have the major aspects or look that we will see Echo going forward? And will we see a further evolution of that if Arcane going? I'm basically saying, have we incidentally been seeing a secret preview of what Echo's going to look like game-wise going forward? Again, I say preview and stuff because Project L does have its own little unique look for these champions and stuff.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's a very real possibility. Thinking about it, I think Echo's another one of those that does not fit the Arcane mold, but fits it better. Like, it's easier to believe that the Project L Echo could be the Arcane Echo. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can, yeah, the art's different, but the hair, the general vibe, you can see it, right? We don't know what he looks like with his Z drive and all that stuff in Arcane. So we don't have that to go with, because as you said, maybe we're getting a little bit of a preview of where he's going.
Right.
So I think maybe you might be right about that. Like, maybe they're confident with where he's at, that by the time we get to the end of Arcane, that it will make sense. Like, they don't have to do a whole lot of changing of his model and stuff. Like, it'll fit well enough. Darius and all those guys, we've never seen them in Arcane, so we have no idea what they look like. Ari,
right.
All that, like, we have no idea. They probably will not be in Arcane, so they have a complete freedom to kind of go where they want with those characters. But anybody, the closer we get to Arcane, then they have to start thinking, okay, if Arcane is canon, then we have to get some consistency in look and feel.
Right. And I just want to say again, I understand that Project L, the looks have certain differences, because they want to give the characters more of a fighting game character bent. So yeah, you will have some aesthetics of their costumes being a bit different here and there. But for certain characters that are from Arcane, like, I'm just going to throw it out there, I know Vi is going to be in Project L. That she is built to be a fighting game character.
Oh, for sure.
I would not be surprised if what we see from Vi in Arcane Season 2, when she earns her title, or her when she earns the name, the epithet, the Piltover Enforcer, when she earns that, when she's suited up, and I'm hoping to whatever higher power is listening, she does not look like what her current look in the game is, because that makes no sense to me, how she looks. But what she looks like there, I would bet you, once she's announced in Project L, you'll see, if it's not a carbon copy, it's going to have pretty much 90% similarity in the aesthetics of her costume.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I like I said, if they're trying to keep, and we may be making an assumption here, like, we may be assuming that they're trying to keep this as canon, because in the end they could easily just say this is an AU in some other thing, and that's just its own story. So like Star Guardian or Project or something like that, and therefore it's just a side thing. And to be honest, if I was doing this, that's where I would go. Like I would go, this isn't canon. It's just something we come up with. It's its own thing. Just to stay away from the comparisons between canon and this, and give them a lot more room to flesh out their look and kind of vibe. You know what I'm saying?
I understand that. That's kind of an action I wish they would have taken with the card game, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I also kind of understand.
Go ahead.
Well, I also kind of understand at the same time why they wanted to be canon, because the card game is ultimately a massive lore dump. It's their vault for like lore, not so much with the champions, but with the world of Runeterra as a whole. Their settings, the goings-ons when you're not following the champion's own personal stories, with the follow cards and the environments. That all of that is a vault and will later be used for the MMO going forward, which I don't think will be canon to the main narrative, because it can't, the way it's structured.
Right.
But it will at least be a vehicle to show what is currently going on, if that makes any sense.
No, I get that.
And Legends of Runeterra has done an amazing job fleshing out the world with its world building outside of just following what the champions are doing, because that's just one perspective.
Right.
They tried it in the past with the short stories and everything, but with what they're planning for the future, there's a reason why they made a new, completely separate department in Riot, strictly there to handle the lore and its continuity and making sure everything's aligned just right, which is going to be one of the most daunting tasks that they have.
I think, and this is my recommendation to the guys that are putting this together, I think that it's okay to say X piece of thing that we're making is not connected to the lore. And I think it's okay to do that. AUs or whatever you want to call it, whatever name they want to label it. Because sometimes the thing that you're making is so vastly different than the world that has been crafted, that it is difficult to keep that together. So it would be better to just let those things be their own thing and use other ways to pass on the lore. So, for example, instead of using a game to pass on the lore, don't do that. Use cinematics or things like that, TV shows, those kind of things. Those things lay down the foundation for what the lore is. And anything that branches off of that, whether it's a game, whether it's the MMO, or another thing that they want to tack onto that, those things only hit the main lore for inspiration. And so therefore you can keep what is the main lore on track without adding these extra things that create all of these possible plot holes that now you have to fill because that game is supposed to be canon. And so it's better just to avoid that completely and just say, okay, look, this is not canon. However, it's based off of the things that we had for canon. Now we're going off into whatever. And therefore, when you're telling that story, you can just go off the rails. You can do whatever you want without having to worry about, oh, crap, we have to connect this piece that I wanted to go right, but instead the main guys went left, and now I've got to connect that to this thing. But thematically, it doesn't make sense. Narratively, it doesn't make sense, but I have to connect it there anyway. And I think that it's better just to separate that stuff and just say, you know what, it's based on the lore, but it's not actually canon. So therefore, we can borrow from it as we need, borrow from the actual lore, and then just use the TV show like Arcane and whatever cinematics they're going to come up with in the future or whatever. Those are the things that drive the lore forward. Everything else is just side things. And that way they'll never have to worry about, oh crap, that's, we got to try to connect that lore. Like, you don't have to worry about it. It doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want and borrow from the main lore when you want to. And
right. So I think that's like what you just said. I like 100% agree. I know for a fact, like, along with the MMO, if Project L does what you were suggesting, I think a lot of people would be okay with that. And I think that may actually happen because he never announced Project L's whatever narrative they have will be canon to like the main lore.
Yep.
So I think as long as they don't announce that it's going to be canon, it's safe to assume that it's its own thing, and it's like it's following a similar path as Legends of Runeterra did. Like, yeah, it's adjacent to the main universe. It's borrowing a lot from it, but it's still sort of its own thing.
Right.
And to that end, I think it's going to be a lot safer for them. And I hope they're not going to be gun shy of following that path you just suggested, because I think if anything, that's going to keep them from imploding.
Yeah, and also it keeps from having to redo lore again later, right? Because if they've already reset once, right? And so we're resetting again. So instead of having to go, oh man, we've introduced all this stuff that's supposed to be canon, but some of it doesn't make sense, some of it doesn't fit perfectly into things, and so now we're trying to match those things. And so instead of doing that, where later on, let's say 10 years from now, or hell, even 5 years from now, they go back and go, ooh, that didn't work, we're going to have to redo the lore again. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you don't want to have to keep doing that. So you need to say lore is we only move lore forward in these instances.
Right.
Everything else is just side stuff that doesn't connect anything. It may borrow, it may even suggest, and it may even be a direction we want to go with the main lore, but we're not actually beholden to that. We can stick with this one vehicle, this one way of telling, and especially if you're going to use a TV show as your main lore, because TV shows don't come out that often. And so,
right.
You're going to have years in between all that stuff. And one of the advantages that Arcane had, at least in my opinion, is that they weren't really tethered to the main lore, and therefore they could come up with whatever story they wanted in order to tell the story that they wanted to tell. Because if they were beholden to the main lore, then Victor would be a completely different person. Echo would be a completely different person. And same thing with Heimerdinger and so many other things. Hextech, you know what I'm saying? Like, none of those things, they went and redid all of those things. But if they were beholden to the lore and had to follow it, then we wouldn't have got it that way. It would have been a completely different series.
Well, this actually sounds like something that we could touch upon later on, because I believe, well, before this new canon lore announcement, Riot was at least treating the lore in the term of soft canon. And again, I can go on and on about that. So if you want to save that for a future episode, be my guest.
Yeah, we probably should.
Yeah, but it's the same thing with it's like with comic books. It's the same sort of treatment. The comics aren't technically meant to end. At least with we're referring to like things with the big two, Marvel and DC. They need to keep pumping out new stories, new stuff like this. And eventually, when you get to a certain point, in order to come up with something different, you have to look at the past and realize, oh, that may not work. And soft canon is sort of a way to keep the soap opera going while still keeping it fresh in like topics, or keeping it up to date with the times of today, or whatever you want to call it. And I think that's what the old lore was operating on in a lot of ways. Whether the new lore operates on soft canon or is it hard canon, it's going to be how Riot handles it, honestly. But again, that's something we can go on in later episodes.
Yeah, we don't really know how they're going to handle it. They did say that there's a video coming up next year that will be canon to the lore. Like, they specifically said that in the video. Like, we will be getting a video that is canon. And I'm interested in how they're going to do that and what that's going to look like. But until we get that, to be honest, we have really no idea what all this is going to mean. You know, how are they going to go at it in the future? And we just don't have any idea about that. And that's kind of the worry for me, but also it is the most interesting is into how they're going to, you know, move the lore forward in a way that makes sense. But also, since they're saying that, say, Song of Nunu is canon, which I still find strange, but they're saying that Song of Nunu is canon. I think, honestly, they shouldn't have said that. I think that they should have said, well, you know, it's got some ideas for canon, but it's not quite canon, you know. And that would give them some room to when they do get around to doing stuff in the Freljord, like, they can not have to worry about that. They can go, okay, we're going at this fresh. We don't have anything that we need to be beholden to. We can just go at it. And I think that that'll open up a lot more room for them to do stuff if they're going to do videos and stuff of things that are going on there. But, you know, they've already said Nunu is canon. But, you know, I would not be surprised if a couple years from now they downplay that at some point. Especially as they get more into the Freljord and other areas of Runeterra. I think as they get where they're now solidifying what actually is going on, I wouldn't be surprised if they go, well, no, yeah, we said that was canon, but, you know, loosely. You know, like, I would not be surprised if they do that. I mean, it's kind of like the other Riot Forge games that they've done. It's kind of the same thing. Like, they were like, yeah, it's canon, and now all of a sudden they're going, yeah, maybe no. You know what I'm saying? Like, I do think that they leave that up to, you know, we can change it later, kind of thing.
Right. I would say, if we're just for briefly stick with Riot Forge for just a little bit, Song of Nunu, yeah, because that thing was in development before Kane even premiered, that may have been a mistake saying it's canon going forward, depending on what futures they have for that region and if Arcane affects that region in some manner going forward. I'm not too sure, because the Freljord's so far away up there. But on the other two that's recently come out, and I'm not including Hextech Mayhem, because that thing's a rhythm game. That's kind of a throwaway, if I'm being honest.
Well, and the same thing with the Yordle game, right? They got coming up, the Yordle game. I don't think that's canon either. They didn't say it was. I don't think it's going to be.
Right. But with the narrative-heavy games, like with Ruined King, that thing got so much praise. And since it takes all those games, it's safe to say, takes place after Arcane. So as long as those champions and those regions aren't touched up on too much from the show, I think Ruined King is safe to say that it can still be considered canon unless said otherwise. I'll put an asterisk there, unless Riot says otherwise. So Ruin King, I think it's safe to say, can still considered canon, since Arcane didn't touch upon the Bilgewater region or the Freljord or the inner goings on there. And this is clearly something that could be insinuated to happen years after Arcane or so. How far forward, I don't know. Convergence is dead, though.
Yeah, that's definitely not canon. I don't think it was canon even when it came out.
That's the thing. No, that's the thing. It did something so perfect that makes it not canon, but still alludes to what we've been talking about with AUs. Spoiler alert, if you never saw the full ending of Convergence, we see it establishes that what you can call the League of Legends multiverse is real. It establishes that all those AUs that have heavy lore in themselves, the Project world, the Star Guardian world, and even Arcane exist. They are actually canon in their own sense. In that instance, or since Arcane has now become the main canon, the way you can construe Convergence is it's another AU. Going forward, Convergence is just an AU that gave us a glimpse of what could or be going on in like the main canon lore that is now Arcane.
Right. It's kind of touching on the Riot Forge games, like the Mage Seeker, Ruin King.
Oh, I forgot about the Mage Seeker. Dang.
All of those, I do feel, since they didn't say they were canon, my default is they're not canon. I mean, because they made a very conscious effort to say Song of Nunu is canon. They didn't do the same with the other things. So I'm going to assume that they are not including, or they haven't decided kind of what they're going to do with that. So they're just leaving them off the list completely. And so internally, I've just decided that they're not canon. So I'm not even, I mean, they're good stories and I recommend playing the games, but I'm just not looking at them as canon things. And that's not to say that the situation going on in Demacia and all that stuff will not be something that they explore later. And that's another reason why I think that they don't necessarily want to be stuck with Mage Seeker, say, being canon. Now, let's say that they do a series like Arcane, but for the Demacia region, now they can go where they want and do what they want to do in the area. And not be stuck with, oh man, we said X thing happened in the Mage Seeker, and now we've got to follow that. They don't have to now. They can just do whatever they want. Same thing with Bilgewater, as far as Ruin King and stuff. I feel like that they now have it's a good idea to shed that stuff and go, okay, we now can just go where we want, and so let's just go there. If we can like those things can be ideas that were thrown out, and they can pick and choose from the things that has already been done and then roll with that. I think that that's a good way to handle those old things like Convergence, Ruin King and stuff. Like I think it's a good way to handle it. And so Convergence specifically, I even after playing it, I didn't think was canon. Mainly because the way the characters are written are just so different than what they were even in canon. Camille being a good example. So like, I just thought, wow, that's not even close. Like Camille's not even close. And also it's another one of those where the tone of the game doesn't necessarily match. So a character like Camille, who has this kind of dark, her original League story is kind of this dark, kind of messed up story. It's dark fiction for sure. And so in Convergence, she's this kind of light-hearted kind of character. You're just like, woo, that's not what I thought. Like, that's not what I thought that she was like, especially when you read her other stories. You just think, wow, she's a completely different character. And so
you know what it is? It feels like somewhere down the road, the studio Double Stallion, who were developing our Convergence, it feels like they wanted to use Caitlyn, but for whatever reason, Riot said, no, we have plans for Caitlyn thanks to whatever's going to happen with Arcane. So instead, they went with Camille, but they didn't rewrite the character and the dynamic that would have been had with Echo. So it feels like Camille was a replacement for Caitlyn that just did not fit as well as they were hoping.
Yeah, no,
because the way they go off about it with Camille being the like doing this investigation and stuff. Yeah, Camille sort of does investigations, but make no mistake, when she's out on a job, someone's going to die.
At least according to the old lore, right? I mean, she's just that kind of character, and that's why I thought it was such a different take on that character that it didn't feel like the same character. And then you've got Jinx also and Echo, like, and I know coming at this from the lens of somebody who's a big Time Bomb fan, but I mean, just looking at it objectively and what we know about Echo and about what we know about Jinx, their interaction in that game is like, I don't really know you, you know what I'm saying? And it just doesn't work. If they're supposed to be friends or were friends at one point in time, then it doesn't feel that way. And so I think that that's one of the other things that I felt like her character was different. And I also kind of felt like Warwick, another good example, though he fits a little bit better to me. The kind of creeper in the dark, chasing people. But why is he after Echo? Is he bleeding? No, particularly. Is there some reason why?
No, he's not.
Just because he's there, he wants to get him. I don't know. I guess I don't know. That part was like they just needed a monster.
Well, that doesn't make him right. You needed the obligatory monster boss fight, and considering the location stuff, Warwick was the best one. But if you knew Warwick's old lore, he would not go after Echo. He would scare Echo and stuff, but he wouldn't actually be trying to attack him unless he was in his feral berserker state by smelling blood.
Exactly, right. And I just thought like that didn't work for me. But you know what? If you look at it as its own thing and it's not a canon thing, I think it works. It's perfectly fine. Like I don't want to knock convergence because I think that it works as long as you don't think about that as being connected. All the characters you meet have never been mentioned anywhere else. It's same thing. Oriana's dad, the whole thing. You know what I'm saying? Like there are just some things that were never things, and were never mentioned any other place. And so I just think that something is. It just felt like its own thing, and that's okay. It's just not canon. And so I kind of looked at it that way. So if you were going into Convergence, which I believe a lot of people did, because I've watched a couple of videos of people who were obviously going into it thinking that this is a canon story, only to find out that it's not, or the connections to canon don't work well, and therefore they're a little disappointed. I think they should have probably been upfront with that in the beginning. I think.
Yeah, same.
But anyway, like that, and that kind of segues into kind of our last thing, which is like, how do they handle this in the future? And we've touched on some of this, and I just think that if they're gonna do this, like obviously they are, because they've already announced that they're gonna do this, that they tread carefully. I just don't want to go another 5 years and they go, we got to reboot everything again. Like
what?
It just gets tiring, because after a while you're just like, it's like playing World of Warcraft. Like at this point, World of Warcraft story, I have no idea. I gave up a long time ago, because there were just too many weird things going on and too many gaming things that they wanted to pass off as canon story, that at some point I just didn't care anymore. So I skipped through all the dialogue, didn't watch any of the cutscenes. I didn't care. So I just want to get to the game and let's just go. Whereas when I first started playing WoW, I was all into the lore. I watched all of the cutscenes. I read all of the dialogue. I followed all the quest dialogue. I was into it, but at some point, I just felt like they went off the rails, and I do think that game needs a reboot, like for real. They need to go back and tighten it up, because there's just some stuff in there. You're just like, oh my God, I'm massively eye rolling here.
Yeah, I'm actually experiencing something very, very similar with the MCU, and I think a lot of people are, because after the whole Infinity Saga, they had such massive potential with the multiverse, but what was working for it beforehand, I'm not seeing the same thing. And I think it's sort of what you alluded to with World of Warcraft or something. The MCU has stretched itself so thin with at least quality management, but they still want to pack on more and more content and stuff, that they have no way to actually like screen any of this to make sure it makes sense here or there, or at the very least it's up to the same story quality that got us all hooked on this franchise in the first place. And I think League's lore, it would be foolish to say it doesn't have the potential to go down the same unfortunate road. I would say, though, what they have going for them is these examples that we've just said, with the way World of Warcraft is handling its lore right now, with the way MCU is handling its like lore and its continuity going on. They have the pit. You can see we have examples of the pitfalls.
I think I'm gonna touch on the MCU thing, because I think you make a good point. But I want to say that the moment they open the door to the multiverse, they screwed up, because now you're opening so many different threads of different characters that it becomes overwhelming to look at everything that could be going on, and trying to connect all those dots. It's impossible to do. It's a problem that the comic books have, where you've got Amazing Spider-Man, and you've got Spider-Man, and then you've got Web of Spider-Man, and you know what I mean? And all of those are kind of in the same continuity, but not. And so you end up having to read all these comics in order to stay on top of stuff. And it becomes too difficult to keep track of everything. It's like when DC did the New 52, right? The whole point of the New 52 was to reboot the DC universe, because it had gotten so convoluted and so difficult to manage that they needed some kind of reboot to start from a starting point, and then from there they could flesh out again. But I think that once you get down into the multiverse and all that stuff, you're adding too many threads, and you're asking your audience to keep track of all that stuff. Do I want to keep track of 50 different versions of Kang? I don't, actually. And so, or 5 different versions of Iron Man, or that kind of stuff. Like, nobody wants to deal with that. Now, granted, as a nod here and there, like in Spider-Man, Far From Home. No, wait, what was the recent one?
No Way Home.
No Way Home, yes. When they introduced new Spider-Mans, that was cool. That nice little nod, right? Like, and it makes sense in the story. But beyond that, I just think it becomes too difficult to keep track of all that. And so, the audience just goes, woo. And then, of course, you've got all these other threads that have to be put together. And I think that the MCU lost its character focus. Like, if you look at the original stories, they're all about the characters. And I feel like it's more about the universe now than the characters, even though the characters are in there and they've got things going on. I feel like they've lost sight of that, and they've kind of spread themselves too thin. And I think WoW is another one of those cases where they've changed writers a few times, and they've got, they've kind of gone off the rails, and so now they're trying to reel it back, because they brought in one of the original writers for the story, and I'm pretty sure he's going to try.
Oh no,
it wasn't
one of. Oh no, just sorry. It's not one of the original writers. It's the original writer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but but I don't think it was just him. I mean, they were thinking of a couple of folks, but he's the main guy, of course, right?
Right.
And so I think bringing him in is good. See if he can wrangle it up, like if you can bring it in and get it back on track. But I feel like they've got to do a better job at storytelling. You've got to build up your villains. You've got to, if you're building up a big bad, you've got to give that big bad time to stew. You've got to let them win sometimes. Like they have to feel dangerous. Otherwise, what's the point? It's like people complain about Kang. He feels like a jobber. Like that's not the way it's supposed to work. We didn't feel that way about Thanos, right? He was big, powerful, and kicked ass. So when he showed up and won, we were like, oh crap, like the stakes are there. There's the emotional weight to that. But if all he's gonna do is show up, and they can afford to do that because there are many different versions of the same character. And I just think that waters it down too much, and they needed to stop doing that. Like, I guess we'll see. But and it's one of those things that for to bring it back to this whole league thing. I hope that they don't get into a point where they bite off more than they can chew. They can't match everything, and they've got way too many characters with way too many narratives that they can't keep things consistent. In which case you start to lose people where they don't care anymore. And when they get to the point where they don't care, then you get the Marvels. And you don't want that. You want people to care. And that's what they did in the beginning, right? The MCU specifically, they people care, so they want to be part of that. And same thing with Arcane. People care. So don't screw that up. You want people to care so that they'll read, watch, play the next thing. And so you want that.
I would say I want to at least have the both of us put a pin in what you were saying about the writers and stuff, and how this can relate to League 2, because that's a whole nother thing that I think we should definitely talk about in the future, because there's drama, there's what happened in 2020 and 2021, I think can really fuel what could happen going forward for the canon lore and how League's going to handle it. But again, that's a whole nother episode that I can go down a huge abyss about.
Oh yeah, that's a huge topic. I mean, that one's huge. We could spend I mean, this whole thing, to be honest, I'm trying to nail it down, and we didn't even get to we're already an hour in, and we didn't even get to some of the things I wanted to talk about, though we did hit the high points, and that's what I wanted. But mainly because there's just so much to this, like what it means overall, how it affects characters, how are they going to deal with it, how do we get to this point in the first place, and what that means for us as consumers of the product. And there are just too many layers to this onion, and I would like to think that in the end, they're able to manage this. But I mean, I can't even begin to describe the amount of work and amount of diligence that they're going to have in order to pull this off.
Well, thankfully, this this is a series, so we don't have to get into everything in episode 1.
True.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Stay tuned.
Yeah, definitely. No, and as a matter of fact, that's probably a good point to leave off for this episode, because I think we covered the main things we wanted to cover, which is, what happened and why it matters, what challenges they're going to have, and what do we expect to happen in the future. There are just so many things, so many angles to take with this, that I think it would be great to go back and look at some other things, and especially like characters, like you mentioned Echo. Like we can do a whole episode on just him. Same thing with Victor, another one. Victor's going to be a completely different guy. Like, I don't think his league version and his arcane version, they're not going to be anywhere close to the same. I think they're going to be completely different people.
Yeah, and to be honest, he really needs it. He desperately needs it, because I am getting so tired of Riot flip-flopping between him being misunderstood anti-hero good guy and just a straight-up Doom clone, Dr. Doom clone. Mm-hmm. No, I'm getting real tired of that.
Yeah, I agree. Like I hope that in the end, and I'm almost 100% sure that it's going to be that way, that he's just not going to look anything like his lead guy in the end, visually or thematically. Like, he's just not going to be that guy. He's going to be a completely different guy. And so we could do a whole episode on just him. And then, of course, there's the differences between Piltover and Zahn, which, from Legends of Runeterra to now, and Arcane, like there's so many different layers to that too, that is just completely different, and so it's going to be interesting to get into some of that stuff. And
imagine what's going to happen when season 2 comes out. Holy crap.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's going to open up some floodgates that season 1 already has. I'm going to look forward to talking about this. Especially like when we get to character specifics, and it is also like it's a rich well of how the characters and stuff are like embodiments or mirrors of what's going on with their regions, and how the regions reflect, and how the regions have these interwoven relations with others, or going forward, and how those things could completely unravel, and how they can change, or even maybe even strengthen, now that I'm thinking of it, with some of these characters and regions that they are alluding to in the series.
Could be even some new ones, right? Some new bonds.
Oh yeah,
we didn't even think about that. All of a sudden they're like, hey, here's this, we're throwing this out there, and it's like, whoa, I didn't even see that. I mean, what if we find out that in Arcane season 2 that Piltover made a deal with Shurima? Like, whoa, who would have thought? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of angles they could take with this. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do in season 2. But at least we know that season 2 is going to be the definition of what not just Piltover and Zahn is going to look like, but I think the world in general. Like, I think it's going to lay down the tone overall. But I also think that tone, we kind of get this oppressive kind of tone off of the first season. But I kind of get this feeling that season 2, they're going to ease off of it a little bit so that they can leave room to do, tonally anyway, to do other things without feeling like it clashes with what goes on, what's happened in Arcane and stuff.
Perhaps. And I could get into that, but I'm going to save that. You got to leave the listeners and the viewers wanting more.
Right.
We're definitely going to touch up on that too, with how season 2 could shift in tone a bit. Just a bit.
Yeah, the thing is, I think it would be fine if they did that. But, again, all of that is now super important to the lore of League in general, since the pillar of all of this is Arcane. And so Arcane and what they put out and all that stuff is now gonna dictate kind of where other things go. And I don't think that the showrunners for that really thought that they were going to have that kind of power in the beginning. But they do. In the end, they can totally shape the world of League in a very specific way. And so, yeah, I'm curious to see where that's going to go. But in any case, we should probably wrap it up here because we've been going a little bit, and I feel like we have so many other topics to get into that we could totally get into them in this one. And I think this is a good point to stop so that the next time we'll pick up one of those threads and we'll roll with it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I want to thank everybody for listening and watching. If you're watching, I appreciate it, and I think we can pretty much call it here.
Right. Thank you kindly, everyone.
Yeah, you want to any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Well, like you said, this well that we've suddenly plunged ourselves in runs real deep. Gonna be interesting to see. It's gonna be interesting to see what we dig up from it and what we bring up from it. I just hope we remember how to come up from air every once in a while. If that made any sense. But I look forward to where we go, the theory crafting, the speculations and stuff. I also, in a weird way, look forward to when I'm wrong on some of the theory crafting predictions, because if that happens, I'm surprised, and that's a good thing for a story to surprise your audience. Not disappoint, but just show something that wasn't up to expectations, because I've consumed so much of fandom and stuff with what I'm interested in that it's gotten to the point where I can go, that's going to happen, beat for beat. I didn't really get that as much with Arcane. I mean, I could still see some of it, but not nearly as bad as before, as others. And even when they did do it, even when I did see it, it was executed flawlessly. And that is becoming very rare to see in the media content these days, whether that be games or movies or shows. So that's a breath of fresh air for me. It shouldn't be a breath of fresh air. You want better quality screenings for this before it gets out, but it's just nice to see. And if this is what's why it takes one of the reasons why it takes so long for the next season to come out, or between seasons, or whatever Riot wants to do to present the lore in other formats of media, I'm all for it. Just please keep up the quality control.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was all into, say, just using the MCU as an example. I was all into it in the beginning, but I feel like the quality and the story writing has gone down, and I really would love for them to go back to kind of how they were doing things in the beginning, and as far as Arcane goes, I hope that season 2 really hits those notes. But as a writer myself, and as somebody who kind of breaks story things down as I'm watching, reading, or whatever, sometimes that can be a bad thing, because sometimes it ruins the surprise of it. But that's okay. I think as long as the writers can do a good job of the execution, then I think the rest of it's okay. And I think most people will be okay with that too.
Right.
you make a good point, and I really hope that they nail it. But I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. But you never know how things go.
Yeah. All right.
But anyway, that's it for this show, and thanks a lot for tuning in. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them down in the comment section. And I guess we'll see you guys on the next one.
Until next time.
That wraps it up for us, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. What are your thoughts on League's lore and the changes they've made in the last few months? Let us know by leaving a comment in the comment section below. I'd like to thank LA for joining me, and I look forward to having him on again in future episodes. Stay up to date with us by following us on Twitter, X, and have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.